A few weeks ago, my friends, I was out here at Lone Wolf Mountain filming an adventure where I was using this tent here. This is the Pomoly X6 tent. After that adventure went up, I had a ton of questions concerning this tent. In this episode, I will be going over not only the functions and features and stats concerning this product, but also my experiences after one trip out. I have some good things to share, along with some bad. My friends, there's a lot to go over, so let's go ahead and get started. First things first, let's do a component breakdown. As you all can see here, the tent is inside of the storage bag. We might as well get this out of the way. This is massive. You're looking at 25 inches long, 11 inches by 11 inches. Without a doubt, this is a large tent, and the storage pack size is also large. With the storage bag here, you have 2 compression straps, you have 2 grab handles, and you have a zipper that goes across the top. With the X6 tent, this is what you receive. The storage bag, 6 aluminum 11mm poles, 8 guy lines, a compression strap for the tent, a stove jack cover and a stove jack, which is already mounted on the tent, 18 massive tent stakes. You have some additional clips just in case those that are on the tent break. And this is the small rain fly that goes over the top. Those are the components that make up the Pomoly X6 tent. Now, my friends, I need to set up the tent. I'm not going to film me setting up the tent this time because I've already done so in the past. I'm going to share the footage from my overnight adventure with this tent. And once I have the tent set up, I'll bring you all back and we'll discuss this setup process. As you all can see here, my friends, the tent has been set up. I've set up the entire tent with the exception of the top cover. In a second, we'll talk more about that, but for now, let's leave it off. As you can see here, this tent is massive. I mean, look at the size of this tent. It is huge. Just wait until you see the inside of this tent. So right here we have door number 1. Over here we have door number 2. And over here we have door number 3. Every single one of these doors has the exact same feature set. You have a storm flap that goes over the zippers, top and bottom. You have tie off so you can roll the door up and put it away. Behind the fabric door, you have an entire mesh panel that's the same size as the door itself. All of the doors and the mesh panels can be rolled up and stowed out of the way. We have a snow skirt that goes all the way around the tent. We have 3 vents. We have 8 guy line placements. And you can see on top here, these are the buckles for the top cover, which again, I'm not going to put on at this time. The reason for not putting on the top cover is simple. I want to show you all the stove jack for this tent. This tent features 1 stove jack port, and you're looking at it. You can see the 2 buckles here. Those are again for the top cover. Behind those buckles, you can see the protective flap. That covers the stove jack. By looking on the inside of the tent, you can get a better idea of what the stove jack looks like when the tent is all sealed up. The fabric cover can be rolled back and tied back. That way it doesn't interfere with your stove system. Remember folks, we do have a stove jack cover that is included that velcros on top of this if you want to seal up the stove jack port. Stepping inside of the tent, we have a few features that we should talk about here. Just as we have a snow skirt outside, there's also a snow skirt on the inside, and this goes around the entire perimeter of this tent. You do have somewhat of a bathtub floor, and it sticks up about 8 inches. With each of the vents, they have covers that can be zipped shut. Lastly, on top of the tent, you have a mesh cargo net. Those are the features of the Pomoly Dome X6 tent. Now, I could show off all the features, I could show you all this tent from a distance, but it does not do a good job of demonstrating just how big this tent is. This tent is massive, folks, and I want to say that one more time. It is absolutely humongous. Because this tent is so big, you need to carefully consider whether or not this is the right tent for you. With nothing inside of this tent, this is a 6-person tent. And I tell you what, let's go over some stats real quick, including the dimensions, as that will give you a good idea of just how large this tent is. First things first, when it comes to the Dome series of tents from Pomoly, there are 4 different tents. There's a 4-person, which they call the X4. There's the 6-person, which they call the X6, which you see here. They also have an X4 Pro and an X6 Pro. To be honest with you all, it took me a while to figure out what the differences are between the regular versions and the Pro versions. And that's because the company does very little to tell you all what the differences are between those models. Let's take the X6 model for an example. If you go to their website and you look at the stats, they're exactly the same as the Pro version. The company doesn't even make corrections to the information in regards to the 2 separate models. This is something that they need to work on because obviously there are going to be some differences, especially when it comes to weight. With the Pro versions of the Dome series of tents, they are designed to be used in warm conditions in addition to wintertime conditions, whereas the regular versions of this tent, the X4 and the X6, they are designed primarily for wintertime cold weather conditions. The difference between the 2 tents can be hard to spot, especially when you're looking at pictures on 2 different web pages. The Pro versions of the Dome series of tents features large mesh panels next to the door. In other words, the Pro versions give you more ventilation than the regular versions. To tell a difference between these tents, you really do need to see the pictures of these tents side by side so you can visually see the differences. And that's because the company does a very poor job of really bringing that to light. With the 6-person version of this tent, let's go over pricing. For the tent only, $610. For the Pro version, $680. If you want to add the inner tent, the price goes up to $720. For a regular version and the ground sheet, it is $690. For the regular tent, with the ground sheet and the tent inner, it is $800. I'm sure you're wondering about the tent inner and the ground sheet. Allow me to explain what those are and what they do. So the inner tent for the 6-person tent and also the 6 version Pro, think of it as an inner for a traditional tent. It has a bathtub floor and it has mesh connected to it, and basically it keeps the bugs out. The inner tent is large enough for 3 people. When it comes to the ground sheet, basically it buckles to the inside of this tent, and it has a section that is fireproof for the stove to go on. That way you don't have to worry about burning debris falling out of the stove and burning a hole in the ground sheet. My plan originally was to purchase the ground sheet and the tent inner, but that was going to delay the shipment of the tent itself. So I decided that I would purchase those later on in the future. I wanted to get the tent in and begin testing it out, and that's exactly what I've done. To finish up with the stats before talking about my impressions of this tent so far, again, this tent features 3 doors. The color is what the company calls sunset yellow and black. As far as the materials go, the outer material is a 40 denier ripstop sill nylon. That features a 3,000 millimeter hydrostatic head rating. That's the waterproof rating. The poles are 7001 aluminum, 11 millimeter. They are very thick aluminum poles, very sturdy. Each of those poles are exactly the same length, and they are quite heavy. Additionally, we have YKK zippers. As far as the weight of this tent goes, you're looking at 18.7 pounds on my scale. Talking about the dimensions, when the tent is set up, it is 7.5 foot tall, and it's 11.5 feet by 13.2 feet. When it comes to the setup process for this tent, it does take some time. One person should plan on at least 30 minutes to set up this tent. You might be able to set it up a little bit faster if you have more than one person with you. The overall setup process is fairly easy, fairly straightforward, but it just simply takes time. Getting the pole through the pole sleeves is rather easy, but getting the tent erect because it weighs so much and the poles are so heavy, and plus they're crisscross over the top of each other, we're talking about exerting quite a bit of force and strength to lift the tent body up as you put those poles into place. So yes, setting up this tent, it's not necessarily easy. You do have to have some strength. But luckily, the overall setup process is fairly straightforward. And that's thanks to the fact that all of the poles are exactly the same length. That way you don't have to worry about getting a specific pole in a specific spot. It doesn't matter. It can go anywhere and you can set up the tent. So that's really nice. In the end, as far as the setup process goes, it just takes time and it does take a little bit of strength. Plus you have to factor in the size of this tent. Now luckily there is a 4-person version, but with the 6-person version that I have experience with, you have to plan on having a lot of space to set this up. Having the space to set up this tent is only one factor that you need to consider. You also have to consider about, like, after the adventure is over, after you're done with your trip, you have to take this thing home and you have to dry it out. Do you have enough space at your home to dry out a tent of this size? Next, when it comes to the materials, the company did not skimp out. This is a very impressive shelter. We have very good materials, good hardware, good zippers, and the quality looks to be very good. At no point in time have I seen any loose threads. At no point in time have I seen any weird stitching or anything like that. Additionally, the seam tape looks very good. Unfortunately, this tent is not waterproof. That is one of the cons that I have for this tent. Now, luckily, the leaking that I've experienced inside of this tent has not been major, but the tent has leaked. We'll talk more about that in just a minute. Going back to just how large this tent is, again, this is a 6-person tent. The company claims that 4 people will fit inside of this when there's a wood stove present plus firewood. In my opinion, having 4 people inside of this tent, that makes sense. 6 people really is pushing it, especially when you consider that the walls taper up. The tent is 6.5 foot in the center, but naturally as you go out, the walls slope down. Again, with 4 people, each has their own space, and they have enough space to move around. With 6 people inside of this, they would be bumping into each other. You can make it work with 6 people, but I wouldn't recommend it. Next, folks, let's talk about how I would recommend using this tent. What comes to mind for me is fishing trips. Car camping, truck camping, forget about backpacking, of course. When you want a tent that offers you a ton of space, in addition to having a stove jack port, this is a very interesting option, especially when you consider the price of this. When you factor in the size of this tent and the price, it's very impressive. In most cases, 6-person tents of this size cost easily over $1,000. So the fact that you can have a tent of this size with these materials, again, it is quite impressive. I mean, the company is using sil nylon, YKK zippers, good hardware. The reinforcements are Dynamo material. The company, without a doubt, spared no expense when it comes to the materials for this tent. Next, my friends, the doors are amazing for this tent. You have 3 of those, each has their own mesh panel, and that leads to very good ventilation when you can have the tent fully opened up. With this being a single wall tent, once you seal it up, condensation can form on the inside. And that's going to be the case with the regular version and also the Pro version. The vents do help, but condensation is going to form in a tent like this, especially when you have more people inside of it. Luckily, the tent is so large, that doesn't really pose much of a problem. One thing that you need to consider about this tent is that it's never going to be completely bug-proof. Again, the tent doesn't feature a built-in floor. Now, you can purchase the ground sheet, it buckles in, but that alone is not going to keep the bugs out 100%. We've seen this time and time again with tents that feature very similar designs. Think of the Gazelle tent for an example. That tent features a floor system very similar to this. It buckles in, you can take it out if you're going like ice fishing or something, but because of the design of the floor system and the design of this floor system, bugs will always be a possibility. Now everybody, let's talk about the waterproof issues that I've had with this tent. So I've taken this tent out for one trip. During the course of the night, it began raining, and basically it rained all morning. Initially, I didn't see the leaks, but once I went to break down this tent, that's when I spotted them. There were 3 leaks in total. 2 along the perimeter at the bottom, and 1 of the doors was leaking down at the bottom. During that camping trip, with the amount of rain that fell, the overall leaking was quite minor, but the tent did leak. Now luckily, all of the leaking was down at the bottom, and also luckily that can be fixed rather easily. While I'm disappointed in the fact that this tent leaked, you do have to consider the overall size of this tent. Think about how much seam tape is on a tent like this. Once you have that figure in mind, it's actually amazing that it only leaked in 3 locations. Again, this is a humongous tent. It is gigantic. There's probably a mile of seam tape on this tent. For me personally, when I consider the size of this tent, the cost of this tent, and the minor leaking, in my opinion, it's not a deal deal breaker. That is of course with the one trip out that I've done. I do have more testing to do, and again, this is just a preview, a first look. I'm going over my impressions of this tent so far based upon the one trip out that I've done with it. My opinion of this tent could change in the future, so make sure to stay tuned to the channel as you will see this tent being tested out and ultimately my review will come up. There's one more issue that we need to talk about in regards to this tent, and it deals with the top cover that goes over the top of this tent. I've showed you all before how it buckles in. That top cover is designed to prevent pooling from taking place on top of the tent. Pulling with snow and also built up snow loading. With the one trip out that I've done with this tent, that top cover did not prevent pulling from taking place. In fact, by morning, I had substantial amounts of pulling taking place in the center of the tent. Because of the size of this tent and how large the roof is, there's a potential for major pulling to take place, and that's what I experienced. We're easily talking about 10 pounds worth of weight on top of this tent, and the thing is, that weight would have just kept on going up and up. But fortunately, I woke up and I noticed it and I took care of it. That poses a problem with this tent, and it deals with the materials. Again, we're talking about seal nylon. Seal nylon is a very strong, lightweight material, but it has one flaw. It stretches like crazy, and that's especially true when the material gets wet. The top cover for this tent, it is made from seal nylon. As it gets wet, it stretches. You go to bed, water begins pooling on top of that material, and that's exactly what I experienced. To make adjustments to that top cover, you have to get out in the rain, and that is something that you would have to continuously do. This is a major con for this tent, and it's something that the company needs to consider very carefully, because it's going to affect customers using this tent in rain and also snow. When I was testing out this tent for the first time, a single thought kept coming back to me over and over again, and that thought was Dragoon. The Light Fighter Dragoon. This tent is very similar to that tent. If you haven't seen the episode here on my channel, the Dragoon is a military tent that is uber expensive. That is an 8-person tent, military grade all the way, and it is unlike any tent I've ever seen. It is truly special. With that being said though, the Dome X6 is very similar to that tent in many ways. And what I'm talking about specifically is the overall shape and style of the tents. The X6 costs $610. It weighs 18 pounds and it's a 6-person tent. The Dragoon is a 8-person tent. It weighs 60 pounds and it costs $4,300. So yes, while there are some similarities, there are also a lot of differences. With the Dragoon tent, that is a military grade shelter. This here is 100% civilian. The Dragoon is made for the worst of the worst, whereas the Dome X6 is designed more for you and I, and the type of adventures that we would go on. That, my friends, is where we're standing with the Dome X6 tent. This is a tent that I'm very eager to continue testing out, namely in rain and also snow. I know the tent already leaks, but I'm curious to see just how bad it could be. The rain event that I tested this tent out in initially was okay. It wasn't bad, but it wasn't a knockdown storm. It wasn't a long duration test. And another question is, what about snow loading? Already we know this tent has issues when it comes to pulling on top and also snow loading, in addition to the leaking. So this tent does have some strikes against it. Luckily, when it comes to the leaking, that can be solved with some seam sealer. Or you could return the tent and get the company to replace it. That's completely up to you. For myself, the leaking is so minor so far, I will fix it and I will keep on testing this tent. Already this video is long enough, so I will say goodbye for now. Make sure to sound off in the comments down below. What do you all think about this tent? What do you all think about Pomoly? Yes, the company has behaved poorly in the past. They've shown disrespect to the outdoor community and they have lost some faith with some customers. But with that being said, the Dome series of tents has generated quite a bit of interest, and that's why I'm here. I've had so many requests to test out this line of tents. Well, here you go, folks. I purchased this with my own money and I will give it to you all straight. I'll share the good and the bad. So far, these are my thoughts concerning this tent. We'll see how the testing goes as we go into the future. Again, sound off in the comments down below. Share your thoughts. If you found this episode helpful, hit the thumbs up. I do appreciate it. Everybody, take care, be well, strength and honor.